Introduction to Rome Literacy Check. Ancient Rome Part 1 Early Kingdom and Republic. Visitors walk among the ancient ruins at the Roman Forum in Rome, Italy, October 28, 2016. Ancient Rome began in the 8th century BC. Then it was just a small town along a river. It eventually grew into an enormous empire. At its peak, it controlled much of continental Europe, Britain, Asia, Northern Africa, and the Mediterranean. Ancient Rome changed the world in ways that we can still feel today. The modern languages, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, all come from Latin, the language of ancient Rome. The alphabet and calendar we use today also come from the Romans. Throughout its history, Rome ran on different types of government. After 450 years as a republic, Rome became an empire in the 1st century BC. The long rule of its first emperor, Augustus, began a golden age of peace and wealth. However, the empire eventually fell apart by the 5th century AD. The origins of Rome. There is a legend about the founding of Rome. The story goes that the city was founded by Romulus and Remus. They were twins, left to drown in a basket on the Tiber River, who were rescued by a she-wolf. They survived and started their own city on the river's banks in 753 BC. After killing his brother, Romulus became the first king of Rome, which is named for him. Rome continued to be ruled by kings until 509 BC. That year, its king Licinius Tarquinius Superbus was overthrown by the Roman people. Rome then became a republic. Under this system, power was shared by government leaders who represented the people. The early republic. The republic was headed by two leaders called consuls. They were elected each year. They also served as commanders in chief of the army. The consuls were elected by the people, but most of them came from the Senate. The Senate was another branch of the Roman government. Most of its members were rich citizens called patricians. The patricians often fought with the plebeians, Rome's common people. The plebeians eventually gained some political power. They controlled their own tribunes, which could make and block new laws. However, by around 300 BC, real power in Rome was centered in the Senate. Military expansion. During the early republic, the Roman state grew quickly in both size and power. Eventually, they gained control of the entire Italian peninsula by 264 BC. Rome then fought the Punic Wars in Carthage, a city-state in northern Africa. The first two Punic Wars ended favorably for Rome. In the Third Punic War, the Romans captured and destroyed the city of Carthage. At the same time, Rome was also spreading east. It defeated King Philip V of Macedonia in the Macedonian Wars and turned his kingdom into another Roman territory. As Rome grew, it learned from the people it was taking over. In particular, the Romans borrowed a lot of ideas from the Greeks. The first Roman literature appeared around 240 BC, with translations of Greek writings into Latin. Romans would eventually adopt much of Greek art, philosophy, and religion. Internal struggles in the late Republic. Internal struggles. Rome became less stable as it grew. The gap between rich and poor widened. The empire was run by a series of warlords. They included Gaius Marius and a fellow named General Sulla. After Sulla retired, one of his former supporters, Pompey, briefly served as a consul. He then began waging war against pirates in the Mediterranean and the forces of Mithridates in Asia. Caesar's rise. When Pompey returned to Rome, he formed the first triumvirate. Under this system, Rome was ruled by Pompey, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and a general named Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was given control of 3 Roman territories in Gaul, the area that is today called France. He then set about conquering the rest of the region for Rome. Pompey's wife Julia, Caesar's daughter, then died in 54 BC. Crassus was killed in battle against Parthia, present-day Iran, the following year. The triumvirate was broken. Pompey stepped in as sole consul in 53 BC. Caesar's fame and wealth had become greater than Pompey's, however. In 49 BC, Caesar and one of his armies crossed the Rubicon, a river on the border between Italy and Cisalpine Gaul. Caesar's entrance into Italy ignited a civil war. Soon he emerged as the sole leader of Rome. From Caesar to Augustus. A few years later, Caesar was murdered by a group of his enemies. The plot was led by the nobles Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius. Consul Mark Antony and Caesar's great nephew Octavian joined forces to crush Brutus and Cassius. Power in Rome was then divided among them, with ex-consul Lepidus. This was called the Second Triumvirate. Octavian led the western territories, Antony in the east, and Lepidus in Africa. There were problems by 36 BC, however, and the triumvirate soon broke up. In 31 BC, Octavian triumphed over the forces of Antony and Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. After this defeat, Antony and Cleopatra killed themselves. By 29 BC, Octavian was the sole leader of Rome. However, he made it look like he was rebuilding Rome's old systems of government. In fact, he kept all real power for himself. In 27 BC, Octavian took a new title. He was now called Augustus and was the first emperor of Rome. How is the structure of the introduction paragraphs 1 through 3 different from the rest of the article? A, the introduction gives an outline of major events in the history of ancient Rome, and the rest of the article discusses the places it controlled. B, the introduction gives a summary of ancient Rome's impact and government, and the rest of the article provides more detail in chronological order. C, the introduction gives a description of Rome's most important leader, and the rest of the article contrasts other leaders of Rome. Or D, the introduction discusses Roman inventions still used today, and the rest of the article explains how Roman wars led to those inventions. Question 2. According to the section, The Early Republic, how was the Roman Republic run? A. The army elected commanders-in-chief called consuls who were able to give more power to Rome's common people. B. 2 consuls were elected by the Senate, which was full of rich citizens who had most of the power in Rome. C. The plebeians and patricians split their power equally in the Senate, but had separate groups called tribunes. Or D. Consuls, patricians, and plebeians were elected to share political power and control laws and armies. Number 3. What effect did the size of the Roman Empire have on Rome? A. Rome's size caused it to become wealthier and more successful because it had one stable government. B. Rome's size caused it to fall apart quickly because leaders of defeated lands worked together to wage war. C. Rome's size strengthened it because the government took advice from world leaders and let captured areas rule themselves. Or D. Rome's size helped it learn things from the areas it conquered, but it also made it unstable as the gap between the rich and the poor grew. And number 4. What is the connection between the sections of Origins of Rome and From Caesar to Augustus? A. In Origins of Rome, it describes the legend of the founding of Rome, and From Caesar to Augustus, it explains how the Roman Empire ended. B. Origins of Rome explains how Rome's original government was formed, and From Caesar to Augustus describes Rome's last leader. C. Both give examples of violent conflicts that changed the government of Rome. Or D. Both detail the reasons for arguments between relatives who were Roman leaders.